can show us all how to do it.
Yeah. But that has been fun this year.
Like, I have all these mixers and stuff, and I have no clue what to do with any of that. Like, I am such a novice at it.
Yeah, I don't know what to do either. We'll do hot topics, and then we'll do a drink menu at home. Yeah. The quarantine drink menu.
That would be fun. It would seriously be fun.
I would say that my favorite find in 2020 has been Darby's Rye Whiskey. That's been my favorite find.
Did you just stumble upon it?
You know, I try to Men's Health Journal actually has a regular column, and it'll go through world whiskeys, bargain whiskeys, top whiskeys. And this was kind of related to one, but it was just something I fell upon.
Nice. We'll make that our first cocktail. We'll do it straight, and we'll do it with juice, and we'll do it with soda or whatever the variations are. So the lightweights can be involved too.
There you go.
My newest discovery was peanut butter whiskey.
I've seen that. I haven't tried it yet.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I'm not a connoisseur, okay? I have no idea, but I'm like, let me taste this. And it was all of us around Christmas time. Everybody did a shot. Slowly, kind of, sort of. But you taste the peanut butter after in the back of your tongue. But it's got that burn going down. It's tasty.
Wow.
Did you say whiskey and peanut butter? Fix it. It's just some stuff that do not belong together.
Oh, it does.
Oh, she said, oh, it does. Trust me.
She disagrees.
I'm only going to try it because I trust you, Rochelle. So I might try it.
Right. Do it. Do it.
Whiskey and peanut butter. What a way to start the webinar. Hey, Fuelers. We're talking about whiskey and peanut butter.
Right. They were like, what is Fuel advocating right now?
Having a good time with the panelists talking about putting together a potential happy hour webinar. So as you all are entering the room, go in the chat and tell me, would you be up for a happy hour webinar where we talk about hot topics, and Rochelle and Gennaro can come on and tell us how to mix their favorite spirits with all different kinds of stuff, and we'll do that all together. If that sounds fun to you, let us know. I'm a little hesitant because I know we're Zoom all the time, but if that sounds fun, then you go in the chat right now. Let me know you're here and tell me if you would be present for something like that. Thank you all for being here. I see you all coming into this space. I'm so excited to have you here for today's Race Bridge conversation. We've been doing these webinars for Fuel since we've been in quarantine, and they've taken twists and turns and pivots, as we like to say now. And I'm happy that we've landed on this series of Race Bridge, really webinars and live discussions that are designed to communicate, share perspectives, and bring people together through stories and experiences. So today we're talking about the impact of racial bias in the workplace, something that we, as we start to go back to work, all of our employers are probably looking at retooling and re-strategizing based on what's going on in the world. And I thought it would be a good time for us to talk about it. Let's talk about what's happening in the world and how we can make our workplaces much better than they were before we hit quarantine. So who do we have with us today? Our panelists are a great group of people who have very diverse experiences and perspectives, and we'll have a great conversation. First up, we have Gennaro, who is the Director of HR Operations for Milwaukee County. You know, me and G, as I like to call him, we go way back now. We like to have conversations about food and drink. And Gennaro, I'm glad to have you here.
I'm blessed to be here. Thank you.
So glad you can join us. Crystal Hardy is a freelance writer and retail manager. Hi, Crystal.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me.
She's going to give us some good stories today. Taha. Hey, Taha. We go way back with Fuel. Taha is an associate and architectural designer at Zimmerman Architectural Studios, one of the prettiest buildings in Milwaukee. Hey, Taha.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, glad to have you. Rochelle and I actually, we got some experiences and events under our belt together. I'm so glad to have you here. She represents Pearls for Teen Girls there. She's a volunteer and donor relations coordinator. I know her through Ex Fabula, though, where she led a storytelling workshop that Fuel did in partnership with Ex Fabula, and she did a great job. Hey, Rochelle.
Hey, Corey. Hi, everybody.
Thanks for being here. Edgar Lynn is of counsel at Ahmad and Associates. He's also a member of Elevasion, an organization that you've heard talked about on this webinar before. Hey, Edgar.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you for having me here.
I'm so glad that all of you can be here. So we're going to get started with the conversation really quick, but I want to make sure I acknowledge the people that have made this conversation and this programming possible. Once we sort of knew we were going down this lane of the Race Bridge conversations, we reached out to a new MMAC member, which is the Self-Help Credit Union. Self-Help Credit Union is actually new to Milwaukee. They're in the space that was formerly the Legacy Bank location. So when you see the address there, that might look familiar to you. If you banked at Legacy Bank or gone past it, you know this is a beautiful bank. And they've sort of come into that space and filled a huge need for Milwaukee in that area. We want to acknowledge Self-Help Credit Union, who's our presenting sponsor for Race Bridge, this whole webinar series. Again, they're new to Milwaukee, so let's welcome them. They're a national financial institution with a mission to create and protect ownership and economic opportunity for all. That is perfectly in line with what we're doing here with Fuel and this Race Bridge conversation. Self-Help Credit Union lends to individuals, small businesses, and nonprofits. They also develop real estate, and they promote fair housing practices across California, Florida, Illinois, and now Milwaukee, so in Wisconsin. So if you have any questions or want more information, Pamela Bell is our contact. She wants you to reach out to her and let us know how you're doing, what your needs are, and she'll see if she can help you. Get you some funding there to get that business or that development off the ground. So thanks again to Self-Help Credit Union. Our media sponsor for this program is Radio Milwaukee 88.9, one of my favorite stations. I always say easily one of the most listenable stations in Milwaukee. You can turn it on and just let it go. When you go to the website, you'll be able to listen to the live stream of their music, but also they have so many different sections and programs and stories on the site where you can really get in touch with what makes Milwaukee a distinct place in the world. So it's a radio station, but it's really also about community and uplifting Milwaukee. Another great partner for us in what we're doing here. So I'm gonna stop sharing here as we jump into the conversation, and let's do a quick check-in with everybody here. I wanna know, we were just talking about being in quarantine and kind of going back to work. How are you doing? Are you hanging in there? Are you ready to get back to normal? How are you feeling? Crystal, I'll start with you.
I'm feeling good. You know, I am definitely a workaholic, so this forced me and all the other workaholics of the world to slow down. I'm enjoying time with my daughter. I spend a lot of time in my garden. I've been doing a lot of writing, a lot of reading books. I'm so glad that Milwaukee Public Libraries are back open and letting you take books out. So that's what I've been focusing on. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. The grocery store is a challenge. Like, I literally want to have panic attacks in the grocery store. So you're too close. Back up. I'm doing all right. I'm feeling good.
Good. How about you, Taha?
We were fortunate to be given the opportunity and the freedom to choose, at this point, to either work from the office or work at home. So that's been a nice flexibility. that we have. You know, in the beginning, we all loved being at home and working from home, but at some point you get sick of it. So I've been coming 2 days a week, and it's been great. Everybody's wearing their masks and being respectful of everyone else. Those who you know, feel like they're better off and safer at home are working you know, at home, but we have the technology set up that allows all to be flexible and work together and communicate. So that's been great.
Yep. How about you, Edgar?
I'm at the office right now. The court system says, you know, I'm an attorney, and the court system varies very drastically as to whether or not you need to go to court or not. So most of the courts you can appear by Zoom. There are some courts that require you to go in, and they'll have a sign that says mask optional, which to me was a little bit strange, but so we're just trying to make it work.
That's gonna be one of our happy hour topics. We'll call it mask optional ? Hey, Rochelle, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm kind of an introvert. Don't tell anybody I said that, but I am. So working from home is kind of cool. Now, on the flip side, I have 2 coworkers. One is 16 pounds and fluffy and gets mad at everybody all the time. And then one is a 17-year-old girl, and she's doing her stuff remotely. So a lot of times we're like, well, where are you going to be? Where are you going to be? I don't know. And so it's that kind of getting used to things. But the thing I am liking is that I think this work from home situation humanizes all of us, right? So yeah, I have a grown-up job, but at the same time, you know what? There's a kid walking in the back. There's a dog barking in the living room. That's what it is right now. And I'm a human, right? So it's all right.
It's all right. How about you, Gennaro?
Well, yeah, I think this is such a great opportunity to really put things in as codified around technology and equity. It's a tremendous silver lining. So I've been really busy about doing that in my capacity. And it's I kind of think of it like when you go to the store, you pay with a 10, but you got change for a 50. It's not exactly a great context, but you know, you're going to run with it, and you're going to be super happy that you could now have a bully pulpit around equity, a bully pulpit around technology, and about how remote working, when you look at job satisfaction for people, is now something in your toolkit as an organization. You can make that part of the equation, and you could drive up your retention numbers. You could drive up your satisfaction numbers. So it's an opportunity-rich environment, even though it's kind of a real terrible time we're living through right now.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like it's terrible and wonderful with opportunity. So with what you just said, let's just hop right into the discussion. As I prepare to ask questions of the panelists, I want the attendees to kind of go in the chat and let us know, what are you looking forward to in this from this conversation? What is it that made you log on? What are you hoping to hear? What are you hoping to gain from this shared experience of the race bridge? Gennaro, I'm going to start with you from the HR lens. For me, in this time, I've been very struck with the number of companies that have come out since the unjust killing of George Floyd with statements and sort of the widespread sentiment around Black Lives Matter, even to, you know, some of the retail places that I've been going to online, and they have these statements on their homepages, and companies and CEOs are speaking out and against racial injustice in a way that I've never seen before. I think a lot of people feel that way. It's like, I've never seen this before. The contrast for me, and we've talked about this, is the amount of times that I've seen people say, you know, I feel like I'm being discriminated against at work. Workplace racism is a real thing. and the response being, that was an overreaction. Oh, maybe that really didn't happen. Now it seems like people are much more willing and open to listen to the possibility that these things could be true. What's your take on that? What do you think where is this coming from, and what are we seeing? What's the potential in this now?
Well, I think that to the scenario and your point, a lot of it speaks to what's problematic in a lot of organizations, that human resources is an area of subject matter expertise, the same way as legal, the same way as finance. And when somebody makes a claim in the organizations I've led, in my current organization, about being discriminated against, that automatically starts off an investigation into the claim. And if it's corroborated, there's punitive action that's taken. A lot of organizations don't have that subject matter expertise, and it kind of defaults to the people manager involved, and it's just not within their skill set to mediate what was that situation. So for me, that goes back to another one of those silver linings, that organizations are looking at hiring diversity and inclusion focused talent to their people, their talent management structure. They're looking at how human resources actually investigates claims of discrimination, and how human resources ensures that there's an equitable playing field for their employee population to move and be recognized. So all those things are coming out of that. I think one of the things that have been most jarring to me is the tone deafness of people in the C-suite making statements to the contrary of where the country's at. I'll cite the CEO of Goya Foods, and having been, being a New Yorican, that's a Puerto Rican from New York, I've really felt dramatically under attack since this administration came into power. And to have, an organization that their wealth and well-being is predicated on the Latino communities that buy their products, just come out with that tone deafness. There's plenty more situations and examples of that. The CEO of CrossFit, again, not honoring or saying that we don't recognize George Floyd's situation. That's been shocking to me.
Mm-hmm. For me, George Floyd, what happened with him, Breonna, I mean, hundreds and thousands of people before them for years and years and years have been stories that largely the African American community has shared and talked about and recognized their lives. And to the extent that we've been able to sort of share this with other populations, I'm really encouraged by the fact that this has become a broader conversation, and I'm all about Black Lives Matter, but also just a broader conversation about race, racism, racial equity, and what that looks like for different populations of color. Edgar, I'm going to direct this next question to you, because I have also been really disheartened by some of the anti-Asian sentiment that we've seen, sort of pop up in social media as a result of, people attributing COVID-19 to Wuhan or whatever it might be. And there's just these drastic, ridiculous attacks against people of Asian origin. Tell us a little bit about Elevasion, the organization, and how have you been able to support your members in various ways, but through situations like this. I'm sure in the workplace, lots of your members are experiencing things and they come to you as an organization. It's got to be a great support group. What are you seeing and hearing from your members right now?
Sure. So Elevasion is an organization that was organically formed And the commitment is to elevating visibility and success of local Asian professionals, businesses, events, initiatives by connecting them to professional developments, stuff like that. We've also now supported and helped build a coalition of Asian American Pacific Islander, a group across the state, to basically call out racist attacks against Asians. And I think it's a extraordinary time for many reasons right now. We have a lot of things going on. We have a pandemic. We have the reckoning of what's going on with Black lives and how they're treated by law enforcement. So there's a lot of things going on. As it relates to COVID, I think, you know, what's difficult is there is sort of this call to action, calling it a China virus, you know, labeling it to a country. Now that may be true, that the virus may have come from China, but America's diverse, and there are a lot of Asian Americans that are going to be collateral consequence to this labeling, right? We've seen an increase in hate crimes all across this country, reported by the FBI against Asian Americans. You know, whether it starts with racial slurs to actual attacks of people in grocery stores. I mean, those are all realities. And so what we have done is at least create this group where we are working with, you know, local officials across the state to help recognize these issues, to see that where the hot spots are, because a lot of times the reality is there's a lot of Asian Americans that are immigrants, and they're not thinking that they could do something about this, right? They don't know who to call. They don't know what to do. They go to the police station. They don't have the language abilities to report a crime. So what do they do? And what we're trying to do is create a resource for them to be able to reach out to us, and we can follow through with those.
That support group also comes through in a lot of different ways. Rochelle, I want to focus on you and the work you do through Exfabula. And as I'm asking you this question, I'm going to share my screen. And these are pictures from the joint partnership between Fuel and Exfabula to put on sort of this workshop for Black professionals. Now, this was several months ago before any of this happened, but our goal was to sort of provide a safe space, a brave space for people to come in and talk about their experiences with race, racism, in the workplace specific to a Black audience. Rochelle, why is this kind of space and storytelling so important in helping people understand how racism feels at work?
Well, it's for sure important in this first iteration that we did when it was a Black only space. And that's intentional. And we're not doing that to say it's brave or it's safe and no one can say anything. But on the flip side, we know that people of color, Black people, brown people, there are some experiences that we share that a white person maybe necessarily won't understand. So if I go to tell my story about something that happened that's discriminatory, and there's a white voice there who doesn't really get it, they're not the subject matter expert, right? They can try and correct me or shape up my story. But the fact is, our stories are our stories, and they're our experiences. So in these spaces, we're able to craft a story that centers us instead of veering off into the offender. Well, this person is like this, and I knew they were mad. Well, you're not the middle of the story anymore. So when we're able to craft these stories that puts us at the center, and we get used to telling this story and being convicted of it, then we can move out into the larger community and express community and express ourselves when something has been done, because you've got confidence in that story. And so to me, that's why these stories are so important. And when we learn to craft them and set them up in such a way where we're at the center, where we're actually helping people see through our eyes, And then I think that's when the light breaks for a lot of people who are willing to have the light break.
Yep, I agree. I think I've seen in my experience, Fuel, most people know Fuel is a part of MMAC. MMAC is sort of, I guess we're 18 months into the Region of Choice effort, which was sparked by, excuse me, our board to increase the numbers of diverse managers, particularly African American and Hispanic Latino managers and employees at large in the companies under the umbrella of MMAC. And I have seen a well-told story really start to change hearts and minds, even before we were in this period of time now where I think people are much more open to speak. But it's been the stories. I mean, we've done stats and we've done reports and we talk about the bottom line, but it has been a really well-told story time and time again that I've seen really help people see something that might not be their own experience. And then they start to believe maybe that's, okay, maybe there's something to this. Crystal, I want to direct my attention to you now because you are a writer and you also have many, many stories of things that have happened in your workplace. And I think you've done a really great job of sharing those stories and those experiences and experiences of other people in a way that informs other people, but is also a way to center your own experience. What sparks you to tell these stories, and do you have one that you can tell us now?
Yeah, well, I just want to say shout out to you guys and to Rochelle and Ex Fabula for even putting together the Black Storytellers Workshop. I had to work, so I could not attend, but I was able to pay attention to the feedback. And what I noticed was this overwhelming theme of like, somebody finally wants to listen to our stories. Like, I got to tell my story. And I feel like for me at work, I hold it in. I don't have a lot of colleagues and things like that I trust that I can talk to about what I go through. And when I've tried, it's been gaslit, and that's a whole other thing. But, I think that it's important to get those stories out. So sometimes what I do is I do share on Facebook about a story of the day or, something like that. And it's from microaggressions at work to straight overt racism. But I think getting it out for me is kind of therapeutic because racism does create a trauma in a sense, and it does affect your emotional and mental well-being. There are days, sometimes where I'm so stressed out or, just so annoyed by all the microaggressions you go through on a daily basis being a Black woman at work. And it's tough. So sometimes I share it in the form of a funny story on Facebook, and people are like, oh my God, people really say that? People really do that? For example, on my first day at work at this new location, a couple of non-melanated colleagues came to my area, and I work in cosmetic retail. So they come and they get the darkest bottles of foundation that they can find. And they're in front of me. They don't engage with me at all. They don't say hello or acknowledge that I'm there. So that was kind of off-putting. But then they hold it up to each other and they're laughing and joking about who wears this color, who's that Black, and and things like that. And it was just kind of like, this is my first day, and it set the tone for things that continue to follow at my location, stemming from that. And then there's also, policing of our bodies and our hair, and it's made through HR practices, like what's kept and what's unkept, what's professional and unprofessional. Like, I can go and people will say that my hair is not professional. This is literally the hair that grows out of my head, but it's not deemed as professional because it's big or it's an afro. And I've had customers and I've had colleagues say, you're more approachable when you straighten your hair, or you just look nicer. You look so militant when you wear an afro, and then you dress in all Black because my wardrobe is Black. And it's just like, how am I supposed to feel being at work and hearing that and seeing, how people treat me if it is straight versus if I wear, my natural hair, wear it curly and big and afroed out. So I mean, it's just crazy. So sometimes I get on Facebook and I'll be like, and something happened again, and people laugh about it. But, for me, it's kind of like a form of therapy to just kind of get it out there and laugh about it, because sometimes people at work don't care.
Yeah, I've had a lot of those same things happen to me around my hair in the same
Yeah.
like coated. Your hair looks it looks so much softer and nicer when you wear it straight. It's like okay, I know what you mean.
Right.
Taha, I'm gonna come to you, and I really wanted you to be a part of this discussion because you're one of these people that are like very supportive of Fuel and have hosted some of our events in that beautiful, one of my favorite spaces in Milwaukee. And we're not friends, but I feel like we're friends. Like I'm always happy to see you, and
Thank you.
I always smile whenever I see you. And when I was thinking about this topic, I really wondered what this, because you and I haven't talked about this, and most of my friends I really do. I wonder what this experience has been for you to be in America, very successful in the industry, in the world that you're in, and to be a person of color. What has been your experience in the workplace?
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I always try to turn, I guess I was raised in a way where to try to turn any negative that you see into a positive and see the positive, but not disregard that negative and try to address it too. Whether it's with a person, yourself, or an organization, there's always room for improvement, right? And there's always room where you can turn that negativity that you may think applies to you into something that's positive, right? But I think most importantly is for you to identify and to know where that error and where that wrong is happening, right? And to always be cautious and to always be aware of your surroundings and the relationships that are around you, meaning are the people around me uh, um, do they acknowledge where my background, where I come from? Do they know about me? You know, what do they know about my background? What do they know about my culture? And where some comments may may seem offensive to others, to me, I sometimes see it as a matter of okay, they might not know much about this topic, right? But I guess if I wanted to take a step backwards, just to step back a little bit and talk about, you know, when we say racism, right? Especially in the workplace, you know, one might think, and to the 145 participants that are online, thank you all for listening. 151 now. I guess some people are asking, okay, what could be done more? What is the solution, right? To me, the way I see it is, okay, why is this happening, right? Why is there racism in the first place? And whether it's in public or in the workplace, there's a difference, even though it might be the same comments. But when it's happening in the workplace, then it's addressed differently, and when it's happening in public, then it's also addressed differently. And the reason why it's coming towards you might be for different reasons, right? So I guess the point that I'm trying to make is um, a lot of times if I was to identify a certain scenario, it could be a lack of confidence in somebody, right? Or frustration, or it could be a simple point that they're trying to make across, right? And how do you turn that and make it into something where you can help spread awareness and make sure that this doesn't happen again to you or to somebody else, right? And I guess by our duty as individuals and as especially to me, I guess that's where the difference comes in terms of racism and as somebody who's a minority and coming from outside the United States as opposed to somebody who's black and who was raised here, right? To me, a lot of times I look at it as, okay, I come from a place where they may have never seen before or they don't know much about, but at the end of the day, that doesn't justify some of the comments or the feedback or the actions that you might be seeing. So I guess identifying also, I do emphasize the word identify a lot. And the second way I am emphasizing is to identify those individuals around you. Are they professionals in the workplace, or are they friends of yours, or are they complete strangers, right? And you, as bad as it sounds, you can't take it as the same weight coming from a complete stranger who's in a road rage, right? Who's seeing the color of your skin and throwing comments, versus taking it the same weight from somebody who is a friend or somebody that's in the workplace, right? So there's different solutions, I guess, to each one of those, I guess, categories, I want to say, right? And it might seem, or it might sound uh, easier said than done, but some things you can help make better when it's in something that's happening in the workplace or a friend. You can educate and you can help that person grow and become a better person versus somebody that's in the public, and you just need to learn not to absorb and take it personal.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I actually have a very short video that I'll show that kind of speaks to what you're saying. When you see microaggressions, or maybe there's a misunderstanding or something that's said in the workplace is offensive, there's a way to educate or follow that up with a question, or to be clear on what the person is saying. Before I show that, I want to talk about the pushback that, I mean, there's been instances where I've seen or experienced things that I thought, okay, that was a little too far, or that's a little offensive, and sort of brought it up in the workplace. And in the past, maybe it'll be different once we're, all back to work, or we'll start taking steps to make it different. But that immediate knee-jerk reaction to say, you're overreacting, or that doesn't happen. What is the effect that has on people in the workplace when they know they've experienced something and there's not a space for them to really say it, or a way for it to be remedied? Any of you can jump in on that one. Do you have any thoughts or feelings around that?
Well, that's what I was kind of hinting around to earlier was, I don't always have colleagues or management that I can go to that's above me to address certain things. For example, we were having a conversation one slow night, a colleague and I on the sales floor, and randomly she goes, and I want to know, I don't know why this Black woman was so mean to me. And I'm like, oh, what happened? And she goes, well, I was giving her kid a compliment in the stroller, and I said, does she look more like you or look more like the dad? Do you know who the dad is? And I was like, well, and the woman got mad, of course. And then she was like, well, this one is not, this kid I have with somebody else. Or so, like, she said something just to be funny, because she felt that this woman, this employee, kind of invaded her space and overstepped the boundary. And so she felt comfortable to say to me then, well, I want to know why Black women have so many babies with so many men. And I just stopped, and all the white coworkers around me were like, I'm not touching that. And they walked away to leave me to deal with it. And I was like, I don't want to deal with, she doesn't want me to deal with it. Like right now, how I feel. And I did address it with her, and I talked to her about it. And then I went to her superior, and I'm telling her the story, and she goes, well, I don't think she meant it like that. And it wasn't the first incendiary thing that she said about someone based on race. And for me to go and sit in a superior's office and hear them say, well, she didn't mean it like that. You didn't even talk to her. How do you know what she meant? I'm telling you what she said. You don't even have us in here together to investigate. You didn't talk to the witnesses. You just flat out told me what she said wasn't offensive. This is why I shouldn't be offended. And it's like, keep that same energy when we get customer complaints, because you believe all of that. Mm-hmm. And we get we face repercussions for that. So keep that same energy. Like, you can't just listen to what I'm saying. And all these companies talk about an open door policy that's not really an open door policy, because they're not listening, they're not caring. And then sometimes people even face, disciplinary action for going to complain about something. So we need to rectify that before we can move forward in diversity and inclusion, I think.
I think that really speaks to what Taha was talking about before. You know, since we're talking about the context of this call, workplace, at the workplace, we each are representative of, you know, our total selves, what we bring to the table, our cultures, our backgrounds. And if I share that with you, that's part of something that I'm doing from a point of education, friendship, diversifying your knowledge so you know more about my culture. Within the workplace, in that scenario that Crystal's talking about, managers are often ill-equipped to deal with that sort of thing being brought to the table. And that's where an organization's learning function really comes to bear. You know, they need to teach, like an instructor-led training that we're doing now at Milwaukee County, how to lead a diverse workforce. And part of it is acknowledging cultural differences on things that you can't take uniformly because you're coming from your culture's basis. You know, a different culture could have a completely different point of view on whatever that subject is. But it's incumbent upon the organization, again, to provide training to their managers, their people managers, have that dedicated human resources function that is going to mediate. And if there's a comment made to that level of gravity, that's a HR investigation. And there are things that come out of that. There are remedial things that come out of that, up to and including things that are inclusive of dismissal, you know, depending on how bad a transgression it is. But I think the education part, like we've done several series around microaggressions and understanding that everybody is experiencing them because of their sexual identity, because of their age. Ageism is super prevalent. Because of people from your own cultural background. There's something that in Latin cultures to be called un coco, you know, coconut, you know, where you're dark on the outside, but you're white on the inside because you happen to be educated and articulate. That's something that is prevalent in Asian cultures where, you know, they call people out for that. And these are people in your own, you know, from your own ethnic background.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of education that has to happen.
Oreo is the same thing.
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
We bring up the topic of management in the workplace, and then earlier we were talking about George Floyd, right? So these are two different places that we each as individuals, we all have a workplace and we all have the public in the public eye of where we're living in, right? And in the workplace, when it is the C-suite, so Corey, you asked us some questions and as to if we have experienced it, where have we experienced it, whether it's the employees, it's clients, or is it the C-suite or whatnot. And so the highest authority in a workplace is the C-suite, and in George Floyd's example, it's the police, right? And if you're experiencing that racism or from the highest authority, then what is the answer? What is the solution, right? The open door policy, similar to a police station that's open there to help you in those situations, but they're the problems coming from there, for example. Then what is the solution, right? And I truly believe that it's, it starts with us as individuals, but the people coming together, right? The people coming together and giving a voice collectively to educate each other, but to educate everybody, whether it's in the workplace or America as a whole. And again, somebody, anonymous attendee, asked, what more can we be doing? I think the fact that we're speaking about it, and the fact that we're having this conference today, and the fact that you're seeing all these protests on the news is a huge step forward to solving this problem.
I think.
Go ahead.
Oh, Yeah, I was just saying, I had one experience, probably my most egregious experience at work, where so prior to private practice, I was a public defender, and so all I see all day are my clients being people of color and the judge being a different color, right? I practiced up north in the Fox Valley region, and I was a new lawyer, maybe less than a year in. There's one judge who is known to make very racially insensitive comments, and he likes to set court dates on, based on your client or your ethnicity, which is what I mean by that is if you have a Native American client, he'll set a court date on Columbus Day, and he thinks it's hilarious.
Oh,
okay.
wow.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Is right. And so one time he said, Attorney Lin, we're going to set a date on Chinese New Year's. And he asked me, do you know when the Chinese New Year is? And I said, no, actually, I don't know what it is this year because it changes every year. And he said, oh, look at this Chinaman. He doesn't know the Chinese New Year. And so I was there in a very awkward position because everybody's laughing like it's a joke, right? I have my client's life on the line on my right, who is going to be sentenced by this judge. What do I do, right? And I was young, right? I was brand new. I just laughed along like it's a funny joke. And afterwards, I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed there, but I was ashamed of myself for not speaking up. And I think those are situations that we could all have in our workplace, not so much with your colleague, but in another context would be for your clients. If your client said something that was racist or something that was problematic. And I think that when it comes to workplace, there's just it's complex and nuanced on how to deal with these type of things. And I think today, it's been, the movement has been pushing, it's very different 20 years ago what this conversation looks like. And like Taha was saying, or Gennaro, like it's incumbent upon us to educate the people in our workplace.
Absolutely. I'm sharing these stats. Is that you, Rochelle?
Yep.
Yeah, jump in.
I think there's another piece to and I get it. We should be in our lives moving through our work life, our home life in such a way that educates. I also think there's a flip side, right? So we're in an environment where people are aware, they know the protests are going on and they're feeling a certain way, they know something is off. I know if, for instance, my husband wanted to take the heater coil out of his car, this required that this man took his entire dashboard out. He looked it up and found out how to do it. It's crazy. He did it. And my point is that when people are feeling this ache, please, and I know I'm not the first person to say this, but also understand that the microaggressions, walking around in the skin I am in, wearing my hair the way it is, I am stressed out already. Please do not expect coworkers, your friends, to educate you. And I say that as white people, and it's coming from a good place, that's wonderful. But don't ask, what can I read? Can you give me a reading list? What should I be watching? That's not helpful because I am in a constant state of trying to heal. I shook off one thing. Now I got to shake off the thing that my 17-year-old daughter's trying to shake off. Do the work. Be willing. If you want to change, you got to do the work. Make Google your best friend.
That's right. Do the work. I think that's a good. So what I was sharing in this, what you just said, is a great segue into what I wanted to share. The workplace stats, and then there's tons of this. Google is my friend. So there's all of these studies. I mean, there's study after study after study that talks about how prevalent workplace racism is, and more so in America than some other places. So this study that I'm showing from Glassdoor compared the U.S. to other countries, where 42% of Americans said that they have either experienced or seen racism, which was 15 points higher than the other countries that were surveyed. In the same study, 55% of the workers said that they thought their company should do more to increase diversity and inclusion. And sort of going back to what we were talking about in the C-suite, men of color make up only 10% of those in the C-suite. And you can look at women of color, just 4%. Now, white men and white women, meanwhile, make up 68 and 18% of people in the C-suite. Rochelle, you mentioned the impact, the stress of, experiencing this racism and constantly surrounded. I found these interesting studies from the American Bar Association that African Americans who had experienced racism and had chosen not to object were 4.4 times more likely to have hypertension than those who stated they took action or talked to somebody. So think about how many times things have happened to folks and you're afraid to say something, you don't say something because you feel like you'll get the response that Crystal has gotten in her example. There's also a positive correlation between the anticipation of prejudice and the increased psychological and cardiovascular stress among Hispanic people. There were tons and tons of studies. I just wanted to pull out these few. I'm going to quickly show this brief video. And the woman in the video is, I'll share the link to her site. She has a lot of good information about how to change workplaces, and this kind of moves us in the direction of like, this is where the problem is and how do we work past it. So I'm going to share this with you guys.
So I talk to people a lot about establishing a diverse and inclusive work environment and creating a culture where people feel free to be themselves, to take up space, I say, right? When I use the word take up space, I mean, if you feel passionate about a topic, you can have big gestures and be a woman or be a person of color, or, have a quiver in your voice and be a woman and not have to worry about all of the stereotypes and assumptions that will be made on you based on your gender or your race or your religious background. You can take up space and be exactly who you are, free from all of the baggage associated with the stereotypes affixed to who you are. When people use coded language about why certain groups of people can access certain resources and other folks that have concerns about other folks accessing those resources, they're usually playing into the stereotypes that are affixed to your group that you're a member of. So for me, as a Black woman, I'm angry, emotional, volatile, tardy, right? Lazy, sometimes criminal, loud, brazen. I mean, there are many, many, many stereotypes that are associated with me just based on the skin that I have, based on the gender that I was born with. Those things exist. This is not an extreme example. The loaded language associated with it is, I had a conversation with Cyrilda and I was afraid. I'm afraid to go and have a conversation with Cyrilda. If I tell Cyrilda that I don't like what she did in her, in her presentation, she's gonna lash out at me. That's loaded language. Where is that coming from? Has she demonstrated that she's actually gonna do anything of that nature? Or is it just because she's got big gestures? Is it just because she's got an afro that automatically elicits fear in you? Those things manifest into policy. Those feelings manifest into rules and regulations that are oppressive to people like me. And I can give you a million of those examples, but they happen all day long. And human resources has got to be charged with interrupting that, digging deeper, asking questions like, has she ever demonstrated that if you give her feedback, she's going to lash out? Has she ever demonstrated that if she works from home, she doesn't work at all? HR has got to facilitate the deeper dive into what's happening inside the person who owns and harbors those assumptions and biases. And they also got to facilitate the coming together of the two people who are from different cultures, different backgrounds, different genders, to explore where the rub is, where the discomfort is. Because if you, the person who's in power, are uncomfortable with that individual, there's probably some discomfort on the side of the person who doesn't have any power when it comes to relating to you.
Charles, you put it back on HR. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think organizations, when, most of my career before Milwaukee County government has been corporate. And when we went to table for a business deal, there was representation from all the expert swim lanes, from legal for the merger and acquisition to make sure it was the proper route, from operations to make sure we were capable of doing it, and from human resources to make sure that, let's say it was a merger or an acquisition, that the workforce we were taking on, we could accommodate into our culture. So the pushback is always going and should always be on human resources to be educated enough and powerful enough. And what I mean by powerful, having a seat at the executive table of that organization to say this is not acceptable, and this is a risk to the organization that we have to mitigate if we allow this to move forward. There's a slew of laws going back where human resources references Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, and we look at the issues related to employment and discrimination, and we have to abdicate for the employee population.
I'm going to share quickly my screen, and then we'll go to the questions and the Q&A in the chat. I wanted to just share these stats, and again, there's so many different studies and stats that I could share, but I wanted to just talk about what's the impact on the actual business when these things happen to folks and they feel like they aren't being heard. I'll share it again here. Here we go. So there were tons of them, but I pulled out these two. So workers who feel like they belong stay with the company longer and they're more productive. Employees who felt excluded, meanwhile, were 25% less productive. We've heard before about the bottom line when companies aren't as diverse, but this speaks more to belonging and the culture that a lot of our organizations have to create this othering of other people, either without realizing that they're doing it, but their lasting effects and the ability to attract and retain talent, and then that talent's stress level and physical and mental health. And they're just study after study after study that show that this happens in the workplace because this is your livelihood and it's a place where you spend more than a third of your day. And this is the place where you go to increase your professional development and your personal growth. And most people want to feel that belonging, which can be a challenge when these little microaggressions come into the fore. I'm going to give you guys a chance to have a final word, but I want to go to Marjorie. Marjorie is my colleague who's been kind of monitoring the chat and the Q&A. Marjorie, what are you seeing from the panelists that you think we should address as a panel? I mean, from the participants that we should address as a panel?
Well, there's one question, and I think Gennaro has indicated he wants to answer. Have any of the panelists reported a racist incident at work and had a positive outcome, and what made it so?
So for me, I don't have any issue with naming that the company was Siemens that I was working for at the time. And Siemens, for those who don't know, global company, employs about a couple 100,000 people and does 100 billion in revenue globally. I had come into a very hot situation that I was hired into. They had 3 people resign over the course of 18 months because the group that they had to deal with was so difficult. But that group happened, out of the entire global operation, happened to be the largest and most profitable. So they kind of were given carte blanche to be a bunch of cowboys. And one circumstance was I was forwarded an email where one of the executives in this group had referred to me by a racial epithet. And in Microsoft Outlook, you can recall a message before somebody reads it. And the person who forwarded me the email was trying furiously to recall the message. But by that time, I already had sent it on to my SVP. And the net of it was that this person, while was not fired, that I was advocating for that person being fired, they did get 0 bonus for that period of time, so there was a direct punitive financial impact to that particular executive. And the funny thing about that was one of the things that Taha and Edgar had referenced was about being triggered. You know, what if law enforcement, or in Edgar's case, a judge, is racist and disrespectful? This individual, when I confronted them, I mentioned, look, we need to schedule time and sit down and talk about this. And all I received was a smirk back from, because the penalties are already been communicated to him. And, you know, the thing about being triggered is that aggression that you feel coming into the workplace. When the way I was raised, that meant hands were going to be flying at some point, because you were going to be, you know, that level of disrespectful. But it was incumbent upon me to not take that path, you know, and not succumb to a, you know, toxic masculinity aspect that it seemed like he was trying to incite out of me by giving that smirk when I said we have to sit down and talk about this because it needs to be resolved.
Marjorie, you seeing anything else?
How do we ensure that businesses and organizations are doing the most they can to create change and truly make a statement against racism? And I guess just overall having diversity and inclusion divisions being effective. How can we help that happen?
Go ahead, Edgar.
I think just looking at the statistic, and I don't remember what the number was, but who was in management, right? It was some minuscule number that are people of color. And I think that that makes a big difference. When you have on top of the sort of chain of command, having someone who is a person of color who understands these experiences, and I think that that will help shape the culture versus, you know, in circumstances where everybody is, you know, say white, old, who does not understand a lot of these things that you should not say, stuff like that. And I think that that's just important to have.
Yeah, that was surprising to me when everything happened with George Floyd and all these companies had their blackout, was it Blackout Tuesday, and, you know, all that. And these companies started to put out their statistics and say, oh, we're being transparent, we know we have to do better. It's like, why did it take this to happen? Like, you didn't see that there were no people of color on your board or in your upper management? It's like, that shouldn't have been the catalyst to get you to look at your own board and your own organization. So they should have been doing the work before that.
Well, I think it's often called the voice of the customer, and the voice of the customer drives the way a organization, you know, makes its revenue. There's something that's equally as powerful, and that's the voice of the employee. And there was one of the answers that I answered to the questions in the Q&A. Employee surveys happen. Employees bad-mouthing their companies does have impact. Organizations look at that bad press and they say, we have to do better, because this is becoming known in the marketplace, which has a direct impact on revenue. And while it seems cynical, the more that things can be tied to revenue and that organization's stature, the more impactful D&I becomes.
I just shared a link in the chat for folks who are interested in getting their workplaces or their HR companies more, their HR departments, pardon me, more involved. This is a link to MMAC's Region of Choice initiative. We have over 100 companies that have signed the pledge. And it's not just a pledge, it's evolving. RaceBridge is actually part of this under the umbrella of this initiative. There's a pledge to increase hiring and diversity in management and the talent pools at large, but there's also a program of learning that every company that signs up for this will have access to best practice sessions, shared opportunities for us to learn and create a new understanding, vocabulary, and culture in the Milwaukee region, which supports inclusion in companies. So I posted that link in the chat. Go ahead and take a look at that if you can. Any last words from any of the panelists? Anything you want to know?
I'll throw this in there. When it comes to us thinking about diversity and inclusion, discrimination in the workplace, and as companies are becoming more and more aware of that, right? So we're putting out those messages. This is what we believe. Everything else, we're doing hiring and whatnot. I always hope to myself that instead of thinking of things as, oh, you can't, like, okay, I'm a white person and I'm going to check in my white coworker, right? You can't say that. That's offensive to fill in. Instead of thinking of things as, well, to be reflective and think, why is that offensive to white me? Why am I just staying away from this and encouraging others to stay away from whatever it is because it's offensive to a certain group? Why doesn't that offend me as a person? And kind of have that self-reflection, self-accountability. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Rochelle. There's a video that I was going to share. I'll email it to all the participants afterwards because we don't have time for me to share it, but it talked about who speaks up and why. And in the video, it said that white people that see racial discrimination at work are the least likely to speak up about it, but they're the most likely to be believed if they say something about it. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of power in if you see it or if you suspect it, to talk to the person that you feel like has been discriminated against and you know, take that step to support and elevate it to people who can do something about it, because the folks that can help make the change are often silent for various reasons. But if you're listening, you're probably on that path to being a friend and ally in this fight. So at this point, I want to thank all the panelists. All of you are amazing, and we're like 6 minutes over. I'm trying so hard to respect everybody's time. At this time, we have about 100 attendees left. I always encourage folks to go into the chat right now and leave little love notes for our panelists. If you learned anything, if they inspired you, if they moved you, please go into the chat right now and say something to the panelists. Panelists, if you guys have access to your device, or you can go into the chat, take a look and see what they're saying to you, because it's usually pretty good stuff in there. Also, if you have ideas for me or speakers or topics that you want me to cover, please go into the chat and share those things too. And while you're doing that, as always, I found a cool little video that I'd like to share. This is one of my favorite parts of the Race Bridge. Let's take a look at this short video while you're leaving your love notes.
There are people out there that would consider me, quote unquote, I hate this word, but a terrorist.
As an Indigenous person, you were known as somebody who potentially could be a drunk, have substance abuse issues.
Being Indian, they may have expected me to know a lot about computers.
It's sometimes a really unique experience navigating the world as a person with a disability who looks to be completely able-bodied.
He made a comment about, well, don't worry about this that's going on because you won't be here too much longer. You'll be off having your next baby soon.
Most women are, told they need to behave a certain way.
People really think that my generation is lazy.
Just another blonde waitress.
Hey, do you rap?
The only black girl.
I didn't belong.
I guess kind of growing up, people made these assumptions about what I was supposed to be, but it was really eye-opening for me to realize that I had been making those same assumptions myself.
We all like to think that we're inclusive, but sometimes we don't actually step back and think, wait a second, did I hear everybody in the room?
I mean, don't judge is the message, but it's also hard not to.
I always thought that every gay man was flamboyant and rude.
The older generation is set in their ways.
Initially, I thought there was something weird about a girl who would want to be a camera operator because of the word cameraman, and we still have to work past these things and stuff.
I went into the school on my first day, and there's these little girls, and they're wearing hijabs, and I was really intimidated by that.
Have your initial judgments, but also be willing to learn.
My definition of inclusion is a world and a society in which constructed barriers have been torn down.
Inclusion for me is setting up an environment where everybody is comfortable.
Open to accept other people's opinions.
All individuals, regardless of their diversity, feel welcomed, feel respected.
It means that they don't have to try to be what others expect them to be.
Change is possible, but it takes the right person to make a change happen.
I had a shop floor supervisor who stood up for me and sent out a company-wide email saying that Robin has every legal right to use the women's change rooms. It's funny because you do find allies in some of the strangest places.
One thing we can do to support inclusion is to talk about it.
You have to demonstrate that you're committed to this.
Get to know people around you. Do something different. Learn something different. Learn about a culture.
Different races, different religions, different belief systems, and see what there's good in all those things.
Be an active listener. That's one of the things I practice with other immigrants as well.
Open up your mind and take your time and get to know someone. Instead of putting them in this box, is showing that interest. It's gonna surprise you.
Ask me a stupid question. I don't care if it's a stupid question, just ask me.
I'm an open book and willing to answer them.
I don't see it as a negative thing. I see it as a teachable moment.
Just ask me how to pronounce my name.
It's simple. You decide that other people's feelings and experiences matter.
We need to have more uncomfortable conversations so that we can drive more inclusion. And oftentimes, it's not easy.
We're not there, but certainly we're on the right track.
And it's important, otherwise change will never happen.
My name is Shomodeep Ganguly, but people call me Sam.
I am Layla Karem.
Mutsa Matanga.
Ms. Geneviève Leblanc.
Ashley Pasila.
Patrick Duff. Neil McLaughlin.
Helena Gotchling.
Rod Bolger.
Jessica Shue.
Kazim Marcano. I'm a chef and I forge metals.
A proud mother.
Forklift operator and a truck driver.
I envision a day when we can just be so accepting of each other, where we can make space for others.
Pretty good, right?
Yeah, I love that.
Pretty good.
Great stuff.
We got some good comments in the chat. I'll go through there and see if there's any responses for me. And there's some last minute questions that will probably become other webinars. So I want to thank you, Edgar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Taha, thank you.
Thank you.
Really encourage us to take a step back and wait and see, okay, let's ask a follow-up question and make sure this is what I think it is. I really appreciate your contributions. Gennaro, thank you.
My pleasure. Our
resident HR expert. We got to have you come back. I want to talk about the culture of Milwaukee versus other places where you have lived. The East Coast is much different.
Yeah, beer. What was it? Beer, cheese, and racism.
Beer, cheese, and racism.
That is awful.
The day that I met Gennaro, we were in a meeting together, and he said that across the room, and I made a beeline after the meeting, like, I got to meet this guy. Beer, cheese, and racism, and we've been friendly ever since. Crystal, thank you so much for your contributions. You're looking good, girl. You got a ring light on over there? You sure?
Yeah, I do.
Looking good. Rochelle, thank you so much. I'm so glad you could be here. We got you powered up and here with us.
Yes, this was good. This was fun. This is fun.
Thank you so much. You all have been amazing. Have been great. All right.
Thank you, Tori, for bringing us together.
Yeah, we'll all be friends after this. When we can get back together, we'll do it. And maybe you'll be my first happy hour group, and we'll come up with the hot topics.
Great.
That works.
I want to do that.
Yeah, we'll have some good mix some cocktails and some good debate.
Yes, Rochelle, I'm going to bother you about your whiskey and peanut butter recipe.
Peanut butter whiskey.
What a combination. What a combination. Thank you, guys. Thanks to all the participants. Let's get back to work.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Be well, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.